Well, MPs have just thrown out Boris Johnson's latest attempt to force a general election on the 12th of December. But tomorrow, he might adopt a Liberal Democrat proposal for an even earlier general election, as long as the government's withdrawal bill is delayed too. The European Union today confirmed their offer of yet another delay to Brexit, this time until the end of January. And this evening, the Prime Minister formally, if grudgingly, accepted it. Well, our political editor, Gary Gibbon, is with me now. Gary, is it inevitable that he'll adopt the Liberal Democrat option?
I think inevitable isn't a word anybody around here has used confidently in quite some time. This vote was the one that Boris Johnson needed 2/3 of MPs to back him on, and he got nothing like that, and he knew he wasn't going to. So the question is he going to go, as you say, for another option, another way of getting to the destination, the December election that he wants? And the SNP and the Liberal Democrats have come up with this wheeze whereby they would back such an initiative. We think, a bit of a question mark over something that the SNP leader in Westminster just said in there, and it looks as though the government is sniffing seriously around joining in that effort, which could happen as soon as tomorrow. We don't have clarity on that yet. What we do have, as you said, is the letter, the one that gives a delay, the one that actually removes the idea of October the 31st being Brexit Day, this time signed. Remember, the other one wasn't. That's gone in. But what actually is the next phase of this saga, we truly don't know yet. There might be slightly more clarity as we get into the evening, but this is how the day went here.
We're leaving on the 31st of October, no ifs or buts. We are coming out of the EU on October the 31st, come what may. Do or die, come or may.
That slogan died today, and with it a wave of highway and online government messaging, warning of a no-deal Brexit on the 31st of October, all rendered obsolete by a letter sent to the European Council President from Boris Johnson, accepting the Brexit delay. Boris Johnson wrote, "I have no discretion under the UK European Union Withdrawal No. 2 Act 2019, which was imposed on this government against its will to do anything other than confirm the UK's formal agreement to this extension." The EU's Brexit negotiator, Michel Barnier, secured the agreement of EU countries at a meeting this morning that Brexit should run up to the end of January, unless a deal is ratified beforehand.
It was a very short and efficient and constructive meeting, and I am happy that decision has been taken.
The Prime Minister, speaking in the House of Commons, chose to make no clear reference to that letter to Brussels, something Number 10 aides had repeatedly said he would never send. He focused instead on his demand that Labour should back his call for a December general election, just as other opposition parties were now doing.
He can run, but he cannot hide forever. Across Parliament, his supposed allies are deserting, and the SNP, I now read, are in favour of an election. The Lib Dems are in favour of an election. What an incredible state of affairs, Mr. Speaker, that there is one party tonight that is actually against a general election. There is one party that does not trust the people of this country, Mr. Speaker, and that is the principal party of opposition. Mr. Speaker, I hope he accepts tonight that he is snookered and that this charade has gone on for long enough.
The Prime Minister has a bill to deliver. He has a budget to present. He has a Queen's speech which he himself told us was vital. He should, for once in his life, stick to his word and deliver.
We find that the Labour Party want to sit on their hands. Sit on their hands, Mr. Speaker, and wait for this government to deliver a Brexit. I say to the Labour Party, don't be the handmaidens of the Prime Minister's Brexit.
Not all the SNP's MPs are comfortable with their leadership's decision to go for a December election.
Well, I mean, I can see from one side, the SNP are going to make gains at any election, whenever it is. The problem is the aftermath. If we've have Boris Johnson in power for 5 years with a huge majority of about 2/3 of the Parliament, there's no leverage at all. We might have more leverage with 35 MPs in a hung Parliament than we might with even all 59 in Scotland in a Boris Johnson-controlled Parliament. And the idea that Boris Johnson is going to change his attitude to Scotland because we have 15 to 20 more MPs, I think is probably for the birds, unfortunately.
The Lib Dems insist they want to head off Brexit and aren't pushing an early election just for their own advantage.
Because you know from your own internal polling, the party could collapse if Brexit has happened and it was going reasonably smoothly. You've got a chance of growing, maybe substantially, if you have that election beforehand. It's all about party advantage, isn't it?
Polls go up and down, and whether or not we have an election before or after any hypothetical Brexit, the polls show that the Liberal Democrats would be performing more strongly than we have going into an election.
Your internal polling shows you collapsing to very few seats potentially after Brexit. Well, you've got all sorts of projections of 50 to 100 seats, haven't you, if you have it beforehand?
I'm not going into the detail, but that isn't a picture I recognise.
And I relish the opportunity to take both of them on in a general election. Yes.
The Lib Dems say they've pretty much given up on this Parliament backing a second referendum. And their confidence won't have been boosted by sackings and insults flying at the People's Vote campaign, which today spilled out of their offices into a public spat as a millionaire backer of the campaign tried to sack the two best-known figures at the top of it.
Ronan Rudd has announced that he's sacking those senior members of staff, including me at the People's Vote campaign. He did this by email last night.
Those particular people have to be moved to different roles, right, aside, because they can't all be in charge of the campaign.
They're told not to come back in the building.
Yes, because
that's a funny way to give someone a new job.
No, it's not a new job. They've got to move from what they're doing, and we can do proper consultancy with them going forward. People's Vote! We've put one person in charge, which is Patrick Hennigan.
The staff have now left the building, and last time I saw it, Patrick Hennigan was sat alone at his desk.
It's a sign that we're in the death throes of the organisation, isn't it? When you hit a moment like this.
I hope not. I think the organisation actually may emerge stronger as a result of this.
People's Vote, one big happy family.
Well, we could be happier.
Stop Brexit!
Few prime ministers have to beg opposition parties repeatedly to let them have a general election, but Boris Johnson is tonight doing just that.
Well, I'm now joined by the Conservative MP, Andrew Mitchell. I think we could call you a Boris loyalist. Just let's look at this result today. So what did that mean? The actual, the vote, the whole vote.
Well, there was a large majority in favour of proceeding to an election.
But not big enough.
But not big enough, because you have to get 434 votes in order to allow, under the terms of the Quinquennial Act, which came in 2010, to proceed.
That's the Fixed Term Parliament Act.
That's the Fixed Term Parliament Act, which was one of the conditions of the coalition back in 2010, one of the Liberal Democrat conditions that the coalition was set up under.
Right, but then there's been a point of order.
So the Prime Minister's now told the Commons and the country that tonight the government will table a one-line bill for an election on December the 12th, and that, of course, only requires a simple majority of one in order to proceed beyond a second reading to committee stage and then third reading, and then, of course, to the House of Lords. But there is a reasonable chance that he will get that through tomorrow, and there is also a reasonable chance that the government and the opposition, through the usual channels, will be able to agree a timetable that is reasonable for this bill to be discussed. And if that is the case, then we could well have an election on December the 12th or conceivably on December the 9th.
There are people watching who are going to be saying, hang on, they had a fixed-term parliament which meant you couldn't have an election other than every 5 years, a fixed term. However, you can break it. What's the point of the Act at all?
Well, the Act has had an enormous effect because it's made it very much more difficult for the government to get an election. But, there's 2 points here that I think really matter. One is that for any member of Parliament to be voting against an election, to be asking to be allowed to stay where he or she is rather than face the electorate, it's a very difficult and demotivating thing to do. I would never want to deprive my constituents of the opportunity of assessing whether I've done a good job or not. And the other thing is that this Parliament is completely broken. You only have to watch the proceedings day after day. There is such a deep division in Parliament now that we really do need a new mandate from the British public.
Now, you were confident that the House of Lords would pass this extraordinary, as yet unused, Act we never knew anything about.
Well, I think that the bill that has been tabled by the Prime Minister tonight, I think if it goes through the House of Commons, I would think that the House of Lords will endorse it, because the House of Lords, as an unelected chamber, is not going to want to tell the House of Commons that it can't have an election.
So we can tell Littlewoods and all the other betting shops that all bets are now on for the 12th of December. There's no way really that is avoidable.
I wouldn't do that, but what you can say is that the House of Commons is inching towards a general election this year rather than next at the moment.
And freezing all discussion of the actual departure bill until after the election?
Yes, the withdrawal agreement, the Prime Minister said he understands the House of Commons is not going to endorse that. He made that point in his point of order. And so this single one-line bill will be to try and make sure that Parliament agrees to his request for a general election.
Now, I must ask you, is the ditch being dug?
Well, you know, he's shown to the country his absolute determination to get Brexit over the line. And for a Remainer like me, who accepts the result of the referendum, we really do need to start the process of healing these divisions by getting out.
In a ditch, dead in a ditch. He's never left it alone.
Well, he's an ex-journalist. He writes very well. He's very figurative. But the point is that he was expressing his determination to leave. And he's doing, you can see before your eyes every day, he's doing everything he can to honour that pledge.
Andrew Mitchell, thank you very much. And let's see before our eyes now the actual announcement of that bill tomorrow.
Thank you. Point of order, Mr. Speaker. The Leader of the Opposition, literally and figuratively, has run away from the judgment of the people for the third time, Mr. Speaker. He's turned down our offer to get Brexit done, in spite of the fact that he and every member of his party stood on a promise to deliver Brexit in this Parliament. And I think, frankly, that the electorate will find his behaviour utterly bewildering. But as I said when moving the motion, we will not allow this paralysis to continue. And one way or another, we must proceed straight to an election. So later on this evening, the government will give notice of presentation for a short bill for an election on the 12th of December so that we can finally get Brexit done. And there is no support in the House, that we've heard earlier on from the benches opposite, for the WAB to proceed. But, Mr. Speaker, this House cannot any longer keep this country hostage. Millions of families and businesses cannot plan for the future, and I don't believe that this paralysis and this stagnation should be allowed to continue. Now that no deal is off the table, we have a great new deal. We have a great new deal, and it's time for the voters to have a chance to pronounce on that deal. And to replace this dysfunctional Parliament with a new Parliament that can get Brexit done so the country can move on.
Joining us now is Andy MacDonald, Labour's Shadow Secretary of State for Transport. What exactly was Labour trying to do today? I mean, Andrew Mitchell's regarding this basically as a win for Boris Johnson.
Well, he may interpret it that way, but what we were keen to shine a light on was that we cannot trust Boris Johnson. And we've said consistently that we want that guarantee of no deal off the table. And this is a Prime Minister who's legally prorogued Parliament. He's won a Queen's speech and he's abandoned it. We've got a second reading on his bill and he's abandoned it. We should be here examining that bill.
Well, let's just listen to what Mr. Corbyn actually said.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I apologise to you and to the Prime Minister for not being here at the point when he raised his point of order. I was detained outside the chamber. I'm now back here. I understand a bill will be tabled tomorrow. We will obviously look and scrutinise that bill, and we look forward to a clear, definitive decision that no deal is absolutely off the table, and there is no danger of this Prime Minister not sticking to his word because he has some form on these matters and taking this country out of the EU without any deal whatsoever, knowing the damage it will do to jobs and industries all across this country.
We will scrutinise the bill and we will want to make sure that no deal is off the table. That's a completely hopeless hope, isn't it?
Well, it's the right thing to say and do, John, because this was our opportunity to examine those important issues around a customs union, that trapdoor issue, and critically, the business of a border down the Irish Sea. this Prime Minister told us that no British Prime Minister should ever put a border down the Irish Sea, and he's
you're
done
a politician who has done plenty of negotiating in his time. The idea that that option is off the table just makes a nonsense of the negotiations, doesn't it? I mean, if they don't have... Because it'll be bad news for Europe if we go out with a deal. Even worse news for us, but it matters to them too.
It will be a nonsense for the people of the northeast of England, where I've got a chemical and process sector that's depending on its ability to trade frictionless with the European Union. I've got 32,000 people dependent upon that.
But you need
29,000 in one car plant.
As a negotiator, you need it as a kind of threat, backstop, in order to get your way.
I mean, to hold a gun to your head and say, give me what I want or the UK gets it, is one of the most ridiculous negotiating ploys of all time. Everybody knows that that's a ridiculous stance to take. Well, we need a close and sensible relationship with the European Union.
I mean, there is one lurking fact, and that is there's a real danger that Labour's going to lose this election handsomely.
Well, I don't agree with that. I think if we're going to be forced into an election in December, let's see what happens tomorrow.
But you're so indistinct about where you stand on Brexit.
But we're not distinct on Brexit. We're not distinct on our attitude towards investing in our national health service, establishing
Is Labour
education
in favour
service.
or against our membership of the European Union? Let's hear it tonight. Yes
Let
or no?
the people decide. The Lib Dems seem to have abandoned any hope of a second referendum. They've nakedly pursued Remain seats in their dash for those powers, and that's an absolute abrogation of their responsibilities. They've been banging on about a second referendum, and suddenly it's out of the window, and the only option is to revoke. What does that say to all of the people who voted in the referendum? It's just simply, you don't matter. We'll not let you decide.
Andy McDonald, thank you very much indeed for joining us. And now we're joined by Kirsty Blackman, who is the Deputy Leader of the Scottish National Party here in Westminster. So, Kirsty Blackman, firstly, thank you very much for joining us.
Great evening.
And secondly, where do we stand?
Well, that's a very good question. I mean, things are genuinely changing on a half-hourly basis. We know that the extension has been granted, so that is good news as far as that goes. We know that the vote tonight on the Fixed Term Parliaments Act did not go Boris Johnson's way, so he's not getting an election on those terms. We're not quite sure what's going to happen tomorrow. It seems like the Prime Minister is going to put forward a bill for a vote on the 12th of December, but we'll have to wait and see exactly what happens with that.
Well, something may happen before then, because what one wonders is, given that you have a motion tomorrow as well, are you minded to talk to the government?
So we're keen for there to be a general election before the 12th, so the 9th is the date that we put forward. And the reason for the difference in that is because we don't want the withdrawal bill to go through.
But the substantive issue is there a way in which you could talk to the government and get some commitments even before the vote?
Do you know what? I don't trust Boris Johnson, and whatever Boris Johnson says in regards to this, I'm not convinced that I trust him to follow through on any promises that he's likely to make on this. And you can understand why. He's tried every single trick in the book to make Brexit happen, and our key objective is to ensure that Brexit doesn't happen in advance of that general election. So, you know, we may have conversations with many different people, but we will not be dancing to Boris Johnson's tune on this.
Is this actually, because you're advocating it as well in a sense, is a Christmas stroke winter stroke cold stroke dark vote a democratic moment in our history?
There are definite problems with having a vote in the winter. Absolutely,
especially in Scotland.
Yeah, exactly, where it's particularly dark through the day most of the time. But actually, I think this Parliament is so stuck, and it's so important for everybody's futures that we do everything that we can to avoid Brexit. That
but then back their bill.
But the issue
that way you get it through.
The issue with it is this bill, the Brexit bill, the Withdrawal Agreement bill, has to go through both houses of Parliament. Now, if we had the general election on Boris Johnson's term, we might end up with that bill going through both houses of Parliament. We know that the Labour Party have voted for it as second reading. We know that they may vote for it later on in stages, and I don't want to see Brexit on Boris Johnson's terms or anybody else's terms going through, and that's why we're doing everything we can to oppose that.
How about a deal? You support their bill tomorrow as long as they scrap the withdrawal bill.
we're going to look at the bill that comes forward, we're going to look at it on its merits. We will look at that, we will look at the possibility of amending it, for example. We will look at every possible way to ensure that Boris Johnson does not get his way and does not force his Brexit through in advance. People can trust that the SNP will continue to be sensible, will continue to be the clear heads that we've been throughout this, actually, at every step of the way. And we will make that same decision tomorrow in terms of trying to stop Brexit, trying to stop Scotland being dragged out of the EU against our will.
So you're determined to defeat it. Can you actually collectively defeat it, particularly if Labour abstain? That counts, doesn't it? I mean, that counts essentially. No.
If it's a one-line bill, for example, it would be a majority. It wouldn't be under the Fixed Terms Parliaments Act, so you wouldn't need that 2/3 that you need for the Fixed Term Parliaments Act. So we'll see how things go tomorrow. We'll see what happens in relation to that. But I don't want...
Are you talking to Labour?
We're certainly reaching out to Labour. We're making very clear that they cannot support Brexit. They cannot do that to our constituents or to their constituents, and I'm still concerned that they may do that. So, the ball is in their court in a lot of ways on this. We need them to step up to the plate and say that they won't be the midwives of Boris Johnson's Brexit.
The problem is, in the end, in your political life, the bigger target is independence for Scotland. And really, in the end, this mess is only part of a stepping stone to that ambition, isn't it?
Do you know what? I want to see independence for Scotland. I have fought my entire life for independence for Scotland. But I don't want to see the UK leave the EU and sink as a result. I mean, we're doing everything that we can to oppose that, and we will keep doing that, because whatever happens, Scotland chooses our own future, chooses to remain in the EU, England will still and will always be our closest neighbour, and I don't want to see them economically, socially or culturally damaged by Brexit.